Yeah, she's good.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out on this beautiful evening to talk about this beautiful place. We are live streaming at the same time. Say hi to the camera, everybody who's watching online. Please get your questions in for later. But if you could just please take a moment to silence your cell phones and all of those things, pagers, beepers that they used to say. That way it doesn't interfere with our recording. We'll get started. My name is Alana Blumenthal, and I am the director of the Brigham City Museums. I am delighted to welcome you to tonight's very special event, Utah North to South, Stories of the Land and the People, part of the programming to celebrate the retrospective exhibit of Russell Case's landscape paintings. Our mission statement at the museum directs us to collect, preserve, and interpret art and materials that tell stories of human experiences and of the land. And we are so glad that you are here tonight to help us promote that mission with a panel that so profoundly represents the richness of those ideas in our state. It is my honor and responsibility to begin by acknowledging that our museum sits on land that is sacred to the Northwestern Band of the Shoshone Nation. It has been their stewardship for time immemorial to care for this land and all of its inhabitants. We honor the memory of their ancestors, their physical presence in our region today, and their resilience in preserving their connections to this place. Brigham City Museum of Art and History is a division of the Brigham City Corporation. We are so grateful for the support we receive from the city to engage in this type of free public programming, and we are especially thankful for our amazing colleagues in the Department of Community Activities and Services. This exhibit was made possible thanks in part to the support of the Box Elder Museum Foundation, the Utah Division of Arts and Museums, and our community members. This program is supported in large part by the National Endowment for the Humanities and Utah Humanities as part of the American Recovery Plan Act. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities or Utah Humanities. It is the privilege of my position as director that I get to come up here and speak to all of you to kick things off. But I need to acknowledge that this event and everything we do at the museum is a team effort. Tonight especially was a labor of love for our curator of education, Marianne Irvin, who has been dreaming and planning this night for over 9 months. If you haven't had a chance to speak with her about this exhibit yet, I encourage you to catch her after the program. And of course, Jennifer Hill and Christian Knudsen, who tirelessly work behind the scenes to make everything happen. Now, I would like to introduce our panel of scholars and invite them to take a few moments to reflect on the theme of connection to the land, and then they will have time to share in conversation with each other. Then we will ask you to get involved in that conversation by adding your questions at the end. First up, we have Molly Cannon. Molly serves as the Executive Director for the Museum of Anthropology and the Mountain West Center for Regional Studies, and as a professional practice assistant professor in anthropology for the College of Humanities and Social Sciences at Utah State University. She teaches classes on museum studies, North American archaeology and anthropology, and GIS applications in the social sciences, and her research focuses on material culture and human-environment interactions. As a geographer, her perspective is that place embodies culture, environment, memory, and personal identity. We also have Darren Perry. He is the former chairman of the Northwestern Band of the Shoshone Nation and a storyteller for his people. Darren was honored for preserving Shoshone history by the Idaho State Historical Society. He also serves on the board of directors for the American West Heritage Center, the Utah State Museum Board, the Community Advisory Board for the Huntsman Cancer Institute, the Northern Regional Advisory Council for Utah Division of Wildlife, and the American Indian Services Board, which provides scholarships for Native American students around the country. He is the author of The Bear River Massacre, A Shoshone History. Next, we have Russell Case. Russell is considered one of today's premier painters in the American West. After graduating from Utah State University in 1990 and with the support of his wife, Suzanne, he decided to dedicate himself to painting full-time. Russell worked primarily as a watercolor artist for many years before transitioning to his now iconic oil paintings in 1999. His work is featured in galleries and permanent collections across the West, including pieces in our own permanent collection. He has received numerous honors and awards over the course of his 30-year career from some of the most prestigious organizations in the Western art world. We are so grateful that Russell and his family call Brigham City home, and for all that he does to represent the beauty of our region and our state to a national audience. And finally, tonight we have our very special moderator, Jodi Graham. Jodi is the third executive director of Utah Humanities in its 47-year history. She joined the organization in 1996 and has had the honor of working with her two predecessors. Jodi is passionate about civil dialogue and has served on the leadership team of the Village Square, Utah, which she describes as a nerdy bunch of liberals and conservatives who believe that disagreement and dialogue make for good conversation, a good country, and a good time. Jodi received her bachelor's degree in musical theater from Weber State University and still sings with her family whenever she has the chance. And with that, I am done talking. I will turn it over for the evening to our panel, starting with Molly Cannon. Thanks you guys for being here.
Thank you, Milana. And thank you, Jodi, for moderating this evening. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Thank you, Russell, for the work that we all had the privilege to review tonight. And hopefully we'll have the chance to talk about and share together and really walk through the galleries at the end of the evening. It's just a stunning piece. Thank you, Darren, for joining us. I'm looking forward. I thought I was following Darren, so I'm looking forward to hearing your comments as well. I am privileged to have this opportunity to talk with you this evening and hear about your experiences of the Mountain West. I'm a transplant. Maybe many of us in the room are. Maybe many of us are from right here in Brigham City, northern Utah. Maybe this is where you've called home. I have to say, I hope we get to this discussion later. What is home? What is place? It has grown on me, the Mountain West. I feel very comfortable when I look at Russell's work. The pieces I'm most drawn to are the ones of northern Utah. And so those are very comforting and make me feel like I'm at home. The Mountain West sustains life through its varied landscapes that have been shaped by water and wind and fire and by ourselves. Right? That's our connection to this landscape. People have diverted its waters to better its wetlands and its slopes for agriculture for thousands of years here in Utah, and we continue to shape this landscape today. We see how vegetation communities have changed over time through purposeful management of those landscapes to create a better life, a sustained life, a life in balance within the ecosystem. We've also seen our ability to put that balance at risk. And I think when we look at some of these paintings, we get that opportunity to reflect and to ask ourselves, how do we want to live here in the Mountain West? Scholars across disciplines have noted the importance of our natural resources, the resiliency within the groups of people who have lived here for millennia, and access to water to support our life, and how important those really are in a challenging setting like this arid West here. Humans have this unique ability to adapt to changing circumstances. And this is something that, as an archaeologist, we bring this long-term perspective to see that evidence in the material record of how people have adapted to challenges in the past. And they've done so through innovations in technology, through migration, through changes within their own social groups, through changes in diversifying economies, This all sounds very familiar, right? These are the same ways that we solve problems today. And so this continued ability to change and shift and live within our settings is something that the Mountain West has really supported. We've seen a lot of change here in the Mountain West, and probably many of you sitting in the audience who've lived here far longer than I can speak to that. We've seen shifts in demographics. We've seen shifts in our communities from rural to urban centers. We've seen changes in our own economies and where we place those resources and what sustains our communities. The environmental and social history of the Mountain West really does demonstrate a need to live within a balanced approach in order for us to have a sustained future. Today, we as stewards, we reside, we are members living within this Mountain West. We sit at this fulcrum to be able to decide how we want to live within our settings. I think Russell Case's work invites us to be present within this landscape. For me, it's easy to imagine myself within this landscape, among the light of the mountains, among the shadows in those canyons, to find a place to share a moment with someone along a quiet stream, to walk along a field, a cultivated field, to tend to the irrigation canal. These are all activities that many of us have the opportunity and think of them as just sort of day-to-day ordinary experiences. But there's something magical in these spaces that Russell presents for us in his work. And like these vast representations of landscape, his work permits us the opportunity to see ourselves among the land and to ask how we want to live there amongst its landscapes, amongst the mountains and the rivers and the canyons of the Mountain West.
Can you hear me okay? Well, thank you, Molly and Russell, for being here, and Jodi, it's good to see you again. Thank you for the invitation to come to a community that I've lived in, our tribal office was in, and it's special to me. So I get to wake up to the most beautiful views of the mountains each day. I live in Cache Valley. I live at the very southern end in Avon. And I'll tell you, every morning when I get up, I look out and see the sunrise, and it makes me thankful for the teachings of my people. I've always believed that ancient tribal cultures have important lessons to teach the world about, among other things, how all things are connected and how our very existence is dependent upon this natural world that we seem to be destroying. And my grandmother would always tell me as a young boy, slow down, ponder the lessons that are being taught as we go for walks and we pick choke cherries and enjoy the environment. And so I've always believed that tribal cultures have important lessons to teach us about our stewardship and about getting back to the ways it was before. I think when Columbus discovered America, he didn't discover a land that was untouched or wild. He discovered a land that has been taken care of for centuries, that has been carefully and lovingly maintained. And I like to think of it as those lands were always Native Americans' first Eden. And we work hard every day to honor that. My grandmother would take me on walks in Cache Valley, and we look at the plants. And I developed a different view of the plants. She taught me all their names, the English name and the Shoshone name. She taught me what the plants were used for, whether they were used as a food or medicine, or both. And she taught me to, as we foraged for food, to leave something for those who couldn't make it to the mountain that day, and make sure that we left something for an inheritance for others that would come later. That was always an important part to me. And I'm so appreciative of the area we live in. I don't know if you know, but just west of our location today is some of the most significant petroglyphs you've ever seen. Anywhere in the state of Utah, out of Commerce Springs. The good news is it's on North of Grumman's property, so people can't get to them unless you get permission. Bad news is you will probably never see them. But as I looked at Russell's work over the years, and especially down in the museum today, they spoke to me. Each image, somebody said, why don't you pick out your favorite one? So I went through the images 3 times to see if I could really identify my favorite one. But each one spoke to me. They told a story, and they reminded me of my youth with my grandmother, and they became alive for me, Russell. And as an artist, I'm sure that's the ultimate goal, is to paint something that tells a story and brings life to an image. I think we live in a time and place today that we've not done a very good job of taking care of our stewardship, and I think we need to be better. And so I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be here. I'm grateful for Russell's work, and I hope I can talk him into maybe painting in the next year or two an image of the Bear River Massacre site for our interpretive center. I think that would be a wonderful honor. I know it would be for us if you would even consider something like that, but it's something that's really important to me and our people. So it's an honor to be here. It's an honor to share a perspective maybe that you might not have heard before. You know, Western values has done a really good job of teaching us that we all have individual rights, that the land is there for extraction and depletion. And the land is there to fence off and make a dollar from. That indigenous worldviews honor our obligations to the past, present, and future, obligations to our communities, obligations to the environment itself, and making sure the environment has as many rights as we do. My grandmother always talked to me about our plant and animal kinfolk. Well, that to me said that they had as much rights as I do. And so when you have that worldview, you look at them in a different way. And I think through Russell's paintings, he gets it. He hasn't said it to me, but I can tell by his paintings that he gets it. That those images, those landscapes, have as much right to be there as we do. And it's our job as humans to make sure we sustainably take care of those things. So it's an honor to be here and share the stage with all of you. Thank you.
Is that on? Can you hear me all right back there? All right. Well, thank you, first of all. When we set to do this, I had no idea what they had in mind, I guess, and how big they wanted to take this. And so it's really fun. Thanks for coming out. And, I'm really encouraged in things like this. I think this could really be a fun process for the community. An annual thing like this where we talk about different things. Like sounds good to bring ideas to the marketplace, right? And so, a little grace, because this is maybe the first time we're really jumping into this, and but here goes. We were kind of weren't sure how this was going to come together, but especially I think the three of us, and exactly how we would dialogue on an art show. And I was kind of chuckling because that's all I talk about anyway, right? But as far as the land and the place and the people, it kind of made me think a little more. But I think first of all, the painting and then the land. I look at it very, in some ways, simplistic as an artist. In one dimension, I'm very interested in an art form and how it designs a format. And so on one hand, it can be a sterile instrument, a tool, right? Just like a music note or a word, but yet it isn't. So I'm always caught between this dichotomy of understanding what it is I'm doing in a bigger way, in a bigger sense. And it's been a huge journey for me ever since my dad got me involved in making paintings. I have a good artist friend who's more of a mentor to me. And he would be out painting, and he said one time, he says, "Russell, we're just making expensive wall decorations." And he said it to get a rise out of me because, I'm this young, excited artist, and we're out here changing the world with our art, right? And he's this veteran master, and so he laughed, as it disturbed me, and I was like, "What are you talking about? This is so important, what we're doing and what we're saying." But over the years, it's given me a little perspective of what am I doing and why? Okay, and so my perspective would be kind of a worldview, you could say, a biblical worldview. I've always painted and drawn, wondering, these things that I'm painting, I'm just an observer. These were here long before I was. They're going to probably be here, as far as I know, long after. And so I was always curious to know that I'm always seeking and learning things. And I was understanding when I was seeing the landscape from a painter's perspective and how to represent this in pigment, that there was laws and rules governing this process that I had to understand in order to reflect what it is I wanted to do. Let me give you an example. It'd be like a musical instrument, and we would say, everybody in this room who has never played the guitar, raise your hand, and then I would give you guitars, and I would set you up here, and we would have a concert. And we would just say, express yourself. Right? Well, it wouldn't take very long when we'd be going, okay, I got to pick the kids up, and we've got something to do. So they would be making sound, and what we would say, you're just making noise. Okay, so as a painter, my job wasn't to just make noise, to just represent something, to just mimic something. It was to create something that was what? That was something you'd hang on your walls, expensive wall decoration? I don't think they're that expensive. So the meaning of my life in the last 40 plus years of painting has been, what am I, who am I, and what am I doing this for, and what does this mean to everybody else? And as I've searched, and I know we're going to have some good questions coming up, so I'm going to try to save some of this for that, but as I've searched for meaning in this, I've read a lot of people that come before me. Very interesting to see people's biographies on the same journey, struggling through art, let's say painting, for instance, struggling through painting and trying to find an end in itself. Okay, I think some of you know Vincent van Gogh, Jackson Pollock. I think you know the ending of their lives, right? So I think there's something that they're definitely looking for. And I think there's something that we need to find. I just don't know if it's in something like art or the land in itself. This is just my opinion on these things, and I think there's a transcendent value to all this. I think when I go out and paint the mountains now, or the light on the mountains, or the rivers, what I see is something that's a lot bigger than me. I grew up in Brigham City, right up on the mountain, or up on the foothill there, on Beecher Avenue. Some of you know maybe where that is. And the trees were what I saw. These big, mature cottonwood trees in that older neighborhoods. When I moved off to college, went to Utah State, got married, moved down to Farmington, loved it. We came back to build a house. Now I live out by Korean, out by the Bear River. And I look back at Brigham City. And now you know what I see? Not necessarily the trees, I see the mountains. So the perspective, my perspective has changed. And so, just in a nutshell, as an artist, that's happened a lot. As it moves through these paintings in my life, if you look, this is what we call a retrospect. So it covers a large span. And some of the wall on the south side is earlier paintings. And so when I look at those, I can see what I was thinking and looking at versus some of the latter things. And we can talk about that in the show. But basically, as far as the land goes, I look at it as an art medium, right? I'm portraying these moods and these things that are universal in a sense of what I'm interested in. Okay, I'm interested in something I can communicate and I can share. It is self-expression. It comes within me, but it's something that as humans we share and relate to. And just to kind of summarize, I think that's a transcendent thing. It's something that's bigger than me, and it's bigger than you and our relationship. Doesn't mean it's not important, but there's something going on, and I think that out there is pointing to something bigger than us. I'll leave it at that as we'll move on to our conversation. So, but thank you for coming, and thanks for just participating in this.
This is so much fun for me. I'm excited and honored to be up here with these fine and brilliant minds, and to engage a little bit in conversation among the three of you. I'd love you to talk to each other. I do have some questions, but if there's a question that you have, if there's something that sparked your interest or your curiosity among your fellow panelists, don't hesitate. Ask the question. And I would also like to just invite all of you to be curious. What are the things that you're hearing tonight that are sparking your imagination? What do you want to know more about? How do you relate to the land, to the art, if you've seen it, and if you haven't seen it, really go see it and really take the time to look at it. So you be thinking as well, what does this mean for me? What is my connection to all of this? And I really love it to make it a conversation, and we'll bring all of you in just a little bit. So be thinking about the things that you want to know and the things that you're interested in. Russell, you spoke a little bit about the first question I'd like to ask all three of you, which actually I'm going to put in a shameless plug for the catalog, which I believe is for sale from one of the friendly museum staff near you, if you'd like to buy that. Not only does it have some of the beautiful work, but it also has some really beautiful statements by all three of our panelists in the beginning. And so I will probably quote from it a couple of times before the questions, but for example, and Russell was just speaking about this, he wrote, every moment we are surrounded, oh wait, wrong question. He wrote, my focus in this show is to help direct our attention to the meaningful patterns of creation, to point to the universal truths that are plain to see of this world and of human life. And so the question that I'd love to hear from all three of you is, what is the importance of patterns in your lives and in your work, and what do you consider to be your universal truths? Back to Russell.
Darren, are you sure you want that? Go ahead, the patterns, you go ahead. I tell you.
The only thought I have on patterns, and I love the way you said it, Jodi. Native Americans have always lived this patterned life. It was something, they were part of the ecosystem. It was just part of who they were. We didn't own things, everything was shared. And so it was all about community and not individuals. And that pattern was just perfect for thousands of years until colonialism came, which brought depletion, extraction, ownership, used the environment in a way to get ahead, to make money. Native Americans never looked at things that way. And so that pattern that Native Americans always adhered to was disrupted in some way. And then they were told to learn in a different way and change their pattern, change it to what you call civilization, a pattern of civilization which was foreign to us, frankly. And so that was a different thing, and our country is trying to change Native Americans from the first minute they encountered us, and that still goes on today. What I've learned as far as a universal truth, though, is even though there's been a disruption of pattern for Native Americans and the way we view the world, my universal truth is I've had to learn to forgive. I've had to learn to look at a different way, people to live in a different way, have a different pattern of life. I've learned to say to myself, that's not my pattern, and if it offends me, I need to learn to forgive. That's the only way I'm going to survive in this world, is if I have a worldview like that. And so my worldviews have changed, my patterns have changed, but to me, it's always about forgiveness. And my universal truth is, now that we're here with different patterns of life, what can we do together to make this world a better place? That's where I always try to get to, and align those patterns up again, because there was a huge disruption for Native American peoples that started in 1492, and in some cases still exist today. And what I love about his paintings, Russell's paintings, is I don't see that disruption. What I see in his paintings is familiar to me. That pattern is familiar to me, with no disruption. And it makes me feel good, so.
Patterns. I'm all about patterns. As an artist, we're looking for patterns, shape, and composition. That's my major tool. To design with is a variety of shape. What is the pattern? Create that art. I need something interesting to hold the attention of the viewer, and to communicate those, maybe a universalism or a universal truth of something that we all share that is beautiful or communicates what it is. Like, for instance, in a painting, if you put a low horizon line on a painting, it becomes very, you have a big sky, it becomes very spatial. If I raise that format to 2/3 or 3/4 of the format of the painting, it becomes very aggressive or approaching or in your face or thing. So there's ways, which is simple design and pattern, to create mood in your painting. I think when I relate it to my life, patterns in my life, I think mostly what I've found is that I'm fallible, because I kind of repeat the same problems, and I need something outside of me. So I would say the patterns in my life can be a problem when somebody steps in and breaks my pattern. When you move from the location maybe as a child, or do something, not necessarily in a bad way or good way, but patterns are all about making me realize that maybe I need to depend on something other than the pattern of things. So I would just say, sure, the fallibility of myself and human beings in general in the idea of patterns when we see these, what's going on in what's going on with Russia and Europe today and things like that. It's very repetitive patterns, right? And I see that in human nature too.
Well, I'm going to approach patterns as a scientist, and that's all we do is look for patterns. We put data sets together, we're searching for connectivity. We use that then to provide interpretations and to tell stories. As a museum curator, that's certainly what we're doing, is we're thinking, what's the narrative? How do we convey this message? And the only way to do that is through patterns that are familiar to both us, but also to our audience. So we certainly use patterns to understand our world. We use patterns to connect ourselves and our audience to those worlds in the case of museum interpretation. And then I think personally, patterns give us comfort for me in my own personal life, right? To be able to have my coffee in the morning, my walk at the end of the day, a little guitar before starting to cook and settle into the house. You know, those kinds of patterns give me comfort too. So that's how I connect with patterns. Certainly, I'm looking for them, I'm using them in my research. I'm using them to tell stories as a storyteller, and then I use them comforting at home. So this idea of universal truths, I think the ones that I wrote down and thought about connect very well with what both Darren and Russell have mentioned. I think that we have a strong connection, a need for connectivity that's universal. For something that's larger than ourselves, as Russell mentioned. And that can take many forms. That can be for us to connect to these landscapes, connect to the environment. It can be a connection within our communities. Darren speaks often about connectivity and this large connection within his immediate family, within his ancestral families, within his community that he lives today. Certainly, I think we all have those kinds of needs and connections. And home. I think a universal theme is finding a home. And a home to me can be a physical space, it can be an emotional place, it can be a social space, it can be a place in the past, it's a place in the present, it's a place in the future, and I may not be there now, but I have a home. Right? That's a universal for me as well. I just got this out.
Okay, it is working. Yay. Thank you all for that. That was lovely and all that I hoped for in that question and more. Molly, I'd like to follow up just a little bit on that last point you were making about what is home, especially with, as Russell mentioned, all the things that are going on in the world and people who suddenly are finding themselves without a home. I would just love to hear from all of you about what makes home for you. Is it a place? Is it an atmosphere? Is it a ritual? Is it the people? Whatever that might look like for you. So I'd just love to know, what is home to you?
Well, for me personally, home is many things. It's my actual home that I'll go drive to here in an hour back to Logan, filled with a cat and a dog and kids and my husband Ken and trees in the yard and daffodils. Right, there's that physical home. But I also carry home with me. Right, it's an idea, it's an identity. But then there's also all of our material things. And this is something we've been studying in a number of different projects at the university, is asking people, what are the meaning of
objects, and do you have objects that sort of hold memory and hold meaning for you? And for me, many of those objects that I think of that have that kind of emotional connection for me really are centered around home. So I have, a desk that belonged to my grandfather. I have, a bracelet that belonged to my grandmother. Those kinds of things would connect me to home. I have, things, I stole my mother's recipe cards because I wanted something with her handwriting on it, right? Like, she could write another one, so I wanted hers, right? And had all of the butter stains on it from all the years of her baking the cake, right? So those kinds of things make up home for me as well.
I'd love to hear from Darren and Russell as well.
I got here quite a bit early because I wanted to see Russell's work, all of it, everything that's downstairs. And I found home in every image, every one. And if you understand, my Shoshone people were hunters and gatherers. We didn't stay in one place. We traveled with the seasons. We looked upon the earth as not just a place to live, but something so sacred and special that we called her mother. And so, as I looked at an image that he painted, I could absolutely see my people in that image. And they saw the same image that I was looking at. And I could see them in this space. And as I looked at another image of the North Slope of the Great Salt Lake, we have all this oral history of place and all this knowledge that, well, in this place we harvested chokecherries, in this place we harvested pine nuts. Every place had a meaning to it, a different meaning, because our lives are counted on it. We had to gather enough food so that we could take the winter off and sit in the teepee and tell stories. Winter was always the elders' time to tell stories. But it was hard work all the other months. And so that hunter-gathering lifestyle that took us into Nevada and the city of rocks and into Idaho and into Wyoming and northern Utah. All of those images just really touched me in a way that I could see my people in every image. And that was home to me, because I've grown up hearing those stories, and I could see my people in those stories.
Is this one of the questions you wanted? I don't think it was.
It was not. That was very sneaky of me.
Home is where the heart is. I have a physical home on this earth, and I know that it's fading. And one day my home will be in heaven with my Lord. But right now my home is with my family, and we live out towards Bear River. And I can remember when I went out to college, traveled a little bit, and I came back. I was coming down the canyon. My dad worked at Intermountain Indian School for a long time, and I grew up right over there by McDonald's before McDonald's was there, and running over to the Intermountain Indian School as a child growing up. And when I remember coming down the canyon, and we come around that corner and just about weep, thinking, this is home. It was so familiar. It was, like you say, the patterns that I'm so longing for in this comfort. But what I do know is one thing in my life, I've been pulled out of those for reasons, and I'm always trying to understand that this is a temporary situation, even my art, right? As Leonard Schmill would say, he would say it's just stuff, Russell. I'd say, yeah, but it's good stuff. So that's my perspective, is my home is here, and it's temporary, and my wife makes our home. She's our homemaker. She's our permanent homemaker. It's made a beautiful home, and we always continue to make that home, even if the kids have moved out. We have a home there, and they're making their homes, and generation after generation home is right here. I went to Box Elder and grew up running around here, and thankful that there's forgiveness, and just home's here.
That's awesome. Thank you all for giving us a little glimpse into who you are and what you consider home. I'd like to shift gears just slightly and maybe talk a little bit about the current world that we live in. It's chaotic. It can be noisy. It can be loud. It can be fast. And in a lot of ways, the land can help us quiet our minds and sort of calm the chaos. Some more of Russell's words. Every moment we are surrounded by an infinite expression of something so immensely wondrous and beautiful, yet we can easily pass by with our thoughts captive to the concerns of our day. Certainly, I'm guilty of that. There's beauty and wonder all around us if we would just stop to notice that it's there. And so my question for each of you is, how do you move beyond the concerns of the day to see the beauty and the wonder around you?
Let me go first. So, get it over with. I had the opportunity a couple of weeks ago before the end of the semester to give a talk and a lecture, and a good friend of mine, a professor at Utah State, in his class, and he wanted me to talk about the political divide that we're in today, and peacemaking and bridge building, and how I do it. If you were to turn on the national news, I think you're all going to admit that we're all in trouble. But I told the kids, the college students, that turn off the national news and go do something with your neighbor. And go for a hike, and go for a walk. Go serve in your local community. And then you tell me how bad the world is. Because when we turn off the noise of the world, beautiful things happen and connections can be made. I am really sure that my political views are completely different than my neighbors who are still flying their Trump flags. But I love every one of them because we don't talk about it, first of all. And I just go serve with them, shoulder to shoulder, and we do things together. And that's how I tackle that day to day. The world can be a dark place if you believe everything you see on TV. And that if you want some peace, then go serve someone. I always tell this story to the elementary kids about, I had a second grade girl one day ask me how I would become a chief. She looked at me dead in the eye and said, how did you get to be the chief? And I just told her, I said, when a young Shoshone boy or girl does an act of kindness or service, that child would get one eagle feather from the chief. I said to her, what would happen if that boy or girl kept doing kind things for those around them? And she said, well, they'd get more eagle feathers. I said, what would happen if that boy or girl kept doing kind things until they became an adult? What do you think would happen then? She said, well, by then they would have so many eagle feathers, too many to count. I said, you know what, you're right. And one day when the chief gets ready to die, and the chief is always the chief until he dies, he will call everyone together and he'll say, I want you to show me your eagle feathers. And it was the person that had the most eagle feathers would become the new chief. And then I tell the kids, you see, the chief isn't the bravest or the toughest or the strongest. The chief is always the one who led a life of service in their community. So I encourage the kids to go be a chief. Go serve in your community. And in that way, you'll become a leader. You'll be somebody that somebody wants to follow. And you'll be a leader that's not rooted in power and authority, but in service, and wisdom, and kindness, and love. And so that's what we need to do. Turn off your TVs and go help your neighbor.
I don't really want to follow that. I I took the question a little more personal and literal and said that I really do have to make time to do that because it is hard to get caught up in our day-to-day and just sort of checking off the list of things to do. But we do live in this magical space where we can just open our eyes for a moment and get outside. Be part of your community. That was in my my sort of list there. But you have to make the time to do it, is what I have put it. And that I'll admit freely that I often overschedule that time of self-reflection and time to sort of look for beauty in the world. That tends to get pushed to the side in my day-to-day. But I do try to make that time again.
I wrote the artist statement, so really I can just say read it. And that's my perspective. But that's a very abbreviated portion of what I would call a statement of clearing my mind. What I need is something. I need a promise, right? I need a truth that's reliable. I think that's what we're looking for when we talk about politics and what's going on. Where's the truth? It's fake news. How can we trust anybody? So what I think is the answer to my clearing my mind is to understand to anchor my soul in something that is true. And the only person that I know that's ever had that claim lived 2,000 years ago, and he said, "I am the way, the truth, and life." He said, "This is why I came to this world, was to profess truth, to manifest truth." He was the incarnate truth. And then he raised on the third day to verify it. So I turn off the news, and I think I'm right with you, Darren. I love to kind of stay informed to a point. And when I find that point is informing me and my worldviews, it starts to dictate my rhythms in life, my moods, and especially my feeling. And I found my feelings can't be trusted. Jeremiah told me, "Don't trust my heart, it's evil, deceitful beyond all things." Who can trust? What he's talking about is my heart, my gumption. I need something that transcends me, that's solid, that doesn't move. I need a true north. And I've been looking for 40-something, 46 now. And that's who made the claims, and that's where I put my trust and faith. When all this world seems like it's coming down around us, he said, let me put my glasses on. He said, "In this world, you will have trouble. But take heart. I have overcome the world."
Thank you all so much for that. It's lovely to hear how you all take inspiration and find those moments of peace and comfort in a world that can be, as I said, loud and chaotic. I think we're very lucky to live in this state. We live in such a beautiful place where you can go in any direction and be in a completely different landscape without driving for very far or very long. Russell's going to be mad at me because there's another question that I didn't prep him on. He's not going to agree to do any more panels with me in the future, so I apologize. But this should be an easy question to answer. So we've got alpine mountains, we've got salty deserts, we've got sinuous red rock. For me, it's the mountains. I've always lived in a place when there are mountains, partly because I'm always lost, and as long as I know where the mountains are, I know which direction I'm going. Also, when I lost my mother, her spirit went into the mountains. So for me, my place of peace is in the mountains. I'm just curious to know from my three panelists up here, and again, apologies for not giving you this question in advance, when you have an image of Utah in your mind, what is the specific place that you see? And Russell maybe is a little unfair for you because all we have to do is walk downstairs and we see what we see. But what is your one special place, your one go-to that when you think of Utah, that is what is in your mind?
I'm going to answer this as if I was answering this in 1873 or 1871. Because for me, it's always the Bear River Massacre site. And I know it's 11 miles over the border into Idaho. But back then there were no borders, and it was the Utah territories. And so for me, I think most people who live in Preston think they should be annexed into Utah anyway. So, but that Bear River Massacre site, I've been going there since I can remember, probably 3 or 4 or 5 years old, sitting on a Pendleton blanket on the edge of the ravine and hearing story after story after story of how our people lived, and we celebrated that and how they died. And so, and being told that those bodies are still there, and it's a sacred place. And my grandmother would always sometimes scare me when I was little, because she said, if you're there at just the right time in the evening, you can sit and you can hear the cries of the little ones crying for their mothers. And I was always mortified that I was one day going to hear these cries. But that is such a sacred place for me. And I know it's not in Utah, Jodi, but it's close. And
I'm always lost. I didn't say you were always lost.
but the landscape there looks much like the landscape everywhere else in Cache Valley too. So there's just different things about it that I love. But that place has a sacred meaning for me. And then if I had to really pick a Utah place, it would be the Cache Valley, where our people called home for centuries.
I'm gonna follow it and say there's a particular spot on Old Main Hill in Logan on the USU campus where you can walk out and get past the trees there, and you can look straight up Logan Canyon. You can look south and see all of the southern Cache Valley, and then this spectacular view of these extremely steep, snow-capped Wellsville Mountains, and that is what I think of Utah. It's sort of this big open landscape where there's snowy peaks. I can see the trees high in the elevations, and the juniper coming down into the sagebrush and this green valley, which is not what most people think of Utah, but that's what Utah is for me.
And Russell, do you want to answer this question? That was sneaky, and you do have a whole gallery.
Yeah, it's in my mind, I can't even, I start here. Molly, what you just expressed, I mean, Cache Valley is very close to my heart. When we were looking at those willows, Logan Canyon and Bear Lake, I mean, even up north where you see up towards Moab and over by Preston, Darren, to me, that's still Utah. I mean, just because it's a border, it's just a border, it's still the area in the country. But I would say it would have to be a physical place for me. When I think of Utah, when someone says, hey, Utah, I think of two things. I think of the variety of Utah. I think of the southern desert. I mean, the desert is, I feel like I'm at home in the desert. I paint the desert. And the only reason I don't live in the desert is because it would become a little insensitive. I would probably grow insensitive to it. I wouldn't see it fresh, so I like to live here. And then when I go on a painting trip, I go down there 2 or 3 times a year maybe, and it's new every time. I mean, down around Mount Carmel, there, the old Maynard Dixon property is just a fond place for me, and right around Kanab right there. I love to paint those cliffs, but then Cache Valley would have to be a close second because of where we live, where I was married, where I had my first child. And I think of all the experiences we had and the patterns. Just a never-ending wealth of beauty in Utah from one point to the next. When I think of the Sinks in Logan Canyon and St. George, Utah, I mean, where would you want to live as an artist? You're so close. So, that's Utah for me. One end to from the south, from the north to the south. I'll tell you another good one. Where I live now, when I think about it, there's a painting down there called Mike's Place, and that was really close to my heart. A couple we were very close with, Mike and Gail Ravenberg. That's his property, and it's painted looking at Mike's Place, his property, looking back towards our house, and You know, I was talking to somebody, Sue, down there today, before the thing, and she said, I said, what's your favorite painting? And she said that one, and I said, you know what? That's one of my favorite paintings too. It kind of depicts this place, Utah, or in more specifically, Brigham City, Box Elder County, maybe. To me, what I could do, if you said, paint one picture of your home, or of where you grew up in Box Elder County, I'd say that's it. So, hope that.
It does help. Thank you, and thank you for being a good sport with an impromptu question. This will be the last question that I ask the panelists. I feel like I'm monopolizing them and hogging them in their time, and then we'll open it up for questions from you in just a moment. But one thing that Molly wrote in the introduction to the catalog, it says, Russell Case invites us to be present within this landscape, to imagine ourselves among the light of the mountain peaks and within the shadows of its canyons, to find a place to share a moment with someone alongside a stream or in an open field, a space to contemplate and consider our place among the mountains. You all have elements of your work that are going to last beyond us in this moment. The art will last, the history will last, and the land will outlast all of us. So my final question is, when you imagine the future for this land, what do you imagine and what do you want to leave behind as your legacy?
Let me go first again. When I imagine the land, and I'm using my imagination here, I imagine the land of what the first colonizers saw. I imagine a land without fences. I imagine a land without depletion. And I imagine a land where we're all good stewards, that our plants and animals we call kinfolk, because they have as much right to be there as we do as humans. We're not superior in any way. That's the way I imagine the land in my mind. A land that was pristine and untouched, and our first Eden. That's the land I want to imagine.
I guess I imagine a very diverse landscape, much like Utah's landforms themselves. They sort of provide us this natural setting that offers a whole range of experiences for us. So I imagine a place where many communities live together, much like we do today, but I think seeing that forward in the future, I imagine, I still imagine places that are quiet and open. And what keeps them quiet and open, I think, is our connectedness and our shared history of these spaces, that we can come together and talk about what's important and how we might be proper stewards of these spaces.
Yeah, I think thinking of the land to come, I've never really thought of that much, but in the idea that we've been commanded to be stewards of the land and to take dominion over it, I hope that we would, like Darren has expressed a concern for those things. I would too. I'd say I hope we're using it to the glory of God. I hope we're doing what we should with the land, and unfortunately, we don't, like he pointed out, and we will see. I hope there's a few more coffee shops when we come out. I love it here, and quiet places, like you said. I hope there's more art museums. Gotta have art. I love the land, and I hope it's preserved in a very godly fashion.
Amen. That was fantastic. Thank you. I would love to open it up for questions now for anyone in the audience, and if my good buddy Nathan is going to come and take one of these microphones, then he will come to you. Ask that you please do speak in the microphone. Those who are joining us virtually will have a really hard time hearing if we don't help enhance their sound experience with that. And also, if there are any comments or questions happening online virtually, go ahead and put those in the chat, and we will also try to address those as much as we can. So here we go.
I'd like to ask the people, and each of them answer. It's about a person, an Indian lady named Sacagawea. I'm going to ask her, where is she buried? In the background, there's some people that believe that her people would winter near Portage, Utah. The weather was milder down south of Pocatello, and so in the winters they like to winter there. Anyway, I just wondered, do you know that Sacagawea Dollar, when it came out, it became kind of an icon art thing. It was a beautiful picture of her. We all know Lewis and Clark wouldn't be in the history books at all without her. Anyway, so just a question. Where is she buried, and what's your idea about Sacagawea?
She's the most famous Shoshone. Why would I not know this? In fact, a month ago I was in Salmon, Idaho, giving a lecture to their community, and the whole community came out. And I went to the Sacagawea Center, Visitor Center. And if you've never been, go on a road trip to Salmon, Idaho, the home of the Lemhi Shoshone. She was Lemhi. Well, where does Lemhi come from? Book of Mormon. You know, so the church sent missionaries up there in 1855 and converted 500 Shoshones and started calling them Lemhi. And they could very well winter near Portage. Some of the Northwestern Band did too. I know that for sure. Where she's buried, the Eastern Band says she's buried at Wind River. She went there as a 95-year-old woman and died. I think she's buried in the Midwest because we don't hear anything from her after a certain period of time. Nothing. And her sons were there. And so I think, even though the Eastern Band is they're my cousins, and I love them to death, I think they got it wrong. I think Sacagawea is back, in the St. Louis area. But what a wonderful legacy she did. And her people, the Lemhi Shoshones in the early 1800s, were moved to Fort Hall. And that's where most of those Lemhi descendants are today.
Okay, another question.
Now I want to go back to the idea of home and the dialogue among all of us, and talk about how it is we engage in the conversation. Russell, several years ago I asked you to paint a image of home for me, which is the Brigham City Tabernacle, so I could have it back in my office in the Washington, D.C. area. I wanted it in watercolor, you made it in oil, and I was glad to have it in oil. Talk to us a little bit, if you can, about how it is we engage in this conversation with one another through the various watercolor or oil or whatever other media that we have, and how is it that we explain to one another our home, be it here where we are, here where we're going, or how we get this whole conversation so that we come together.
I'm not sure I completely understand. Are you meaning in the medium of oil and watercolor, or are you referring to?
Generally, but that could be a good example, yes.
Well, the mediums to me are just another tool. Like I painted watercolor for 20 odd years, and then I switched to oil. We must have met then at that turning of the page, right?
In fact, yes, too late.
That's right. No, you're bringing back some memory. That's not easy to do. I don't know. The medium to me was simply a transition from something that was a very familiar pattern that I thought it's time to change. But I didn't know. It just kind of, I started painting in oil, and it was so nice. After you paint in watercolor, you know the difference. Watercolor moves around. It's like our grandkids. They move around a lot. And sometimes you want something to just stay right there where you put it. So oil is very immediate. You know, you put something down, you get what you get. You move through it. So I wasn't ever guessing, right? There was this kind of truth to it. I get what I'm going to put down. And not just a feel, because watercolor I had to plan for the whites. You know, you plan around things when you paint from light to dark. Oil, I paint from dark to light. So it's backwards. Some people say, why don't you go back to watercolor? I'm like, because it's backwards. I have a hard enough time thinking forward in one linear direction. I can't revert back. I say, there's days I want to, but anyway, that's if you're referring to that transition for me, that was kind of it. I was kind of in a place where I was watching friends of mine make a lot more money with the oils, and I was like, man, they look like they're having so much more fun than me drawing these things out and planning and tediously putting it together. You know, there's a lot to say for that. I'm not giving watercolor a bad name. But on the other hand, man, I've been doing it for a long time and a lot of it, and I was like, all of a sudden, this was fun. I grabbed the oil paint and started pushing paint around. And texture is a lot easier for me to get effects with. And just the versatility of it, it was just, and then I was off and running down the road, and I never really got back to watercolor. Now, how do I connect that to home? I'm not sure. That's the part I'm not sure in your question. My dad was a watercolorist, and we grew up here, and that's where I started painting in watercolors. I went to Utah State, painted watercolors, and I didn't switch over to oil till probably, like I said, about halfway through my career. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Wonderful. Another question. We probably have time for this one and then one more. So choose wisely. We need to get the microphone from back here to up here. Okay. It was a tie. We'll take you both as our last question.
I did a question. My question is for Mr. Case here, and it has to do with landscape painting and the landscape. When I was a young man, this was 50 years ago. I was an art student at the University of Utah, and I wanted to learn how to be a landscape painter. And I was told that they don't teach that anymore. There was an old guy, an old dinosaur they kept around that taught on Saturday, and that was LeConte Stewart. And LeConte would take a group of students, those that wanted to learn landscape, and he would take them up to Davis County, and they would paint. And I didn't do it because Saturday is when you go skiing when you're a young kid. But the question I have is, growing up in the Wasatch Front, the area that LeConte Stewart painted, and I think he was probably the best landscape artist present company accepted Utah ever produced, an amazing artist, but he focused on the Wasatch Front, Salt Lake County, all the way to Cache County, and he did amazing things. The land, the area that he painted is long gone. It doesn't exist anymore. This is before the freeway came in. He painted when there was less than 1 million people. Now there's almost 4 million people in the Wasatch Front. And so my question to you is, and I was told landscape painting is fading. Nobody does it anymore. The university doesn't teach it, and yet it survives. People love it. It's an amazing medium that in every museum people will go see the landscape artist. So my question to you is, what do you think is the future of a landscape artist? Is it going to grow and grow, or is it going to fade to more contemporary?
Thanks for the clarity of the question. That's very articulate and exactly right in my wheelhouse. Okay? this is what we need to do. We need to bring back this art. It's being swallowed up in postmodernist worldviews, you guys. Traditional landscape painting. 50 years ago, when you were seeing that, there were some very good traditional painters. At Utah State, there was Harrison Rowley, Gail Lindstrom, Beth Thorpe, Glenn Edwards, Adrian Van Suchland. There still is a remnant here and there. And then at Utah, there was Gittins and those guys. I forget some of their names, but it was a powerhouse. Utah has turned out some of the best painters in the country. This medium and genre, but it's fading. And a lot of the artists that are here, you guys have a lot of painters around here, but they have to make a living outside of Utah, which we understand. But my beef is to stand up. What's going on is an attack of worldviews. It's no doubt. The modern movement has said this is not important, and beauty is in the eye of the beholder. There is no universal truth. That's what it's attacking. It's attacking the very structure of what we're talking about. What they want to do is they want to get rid of anything that's formulated or from individual communication. Everything has to be random because there's nothing that started this and there's no purpose in it necessarily. It's a lot to go into, but if you want to read more about it, read the 5th book of Schaeffer. William Schaeffer wrote a lot about this. So calm down and just, what I would say is things like this is what when we talk about doing this show, this is what I was very interested in. I would love to kind of re-spark the landscape era, especially in Utah. Utah was one of the last ones to be affected by a lot of those postmodern movements because we were a little bit more isolated here. Just like in other things, it wasn't a little more conservative area, but guess what? It's here now. I was at the tail end of the Utah State. Right? Harrison Groudage, Lindstrom had just retired. Harrison Groudage retired the year I did. It was his last year. And he was one of the greatest academic painters of our area. And I just don't know if I can say it enough. It was just such a beautiful thing, what they were producing and doing. We need to have shows. We need to produce the very best of it. We don't just produce, we just don't show everything, right? I know this sounds politically correct, but you want to take what's being done and give credit where credit is due and have shows like this. Promote it, get it out there, and don't be afraid to go back to tradition. New things aren't good just because they're new. And I'm not saying everything is good. And I'm not saying everything's bad in the modern movements. There's some beautiful things that are being done. Color, line, form, texture, value, shape, all these things are beautiful, even without representation, even if there's not an identified object in it, like a tree or a plant or a flower or a mountain, okay? You can still have a beautiful painting with shape and rhythm and form. That's part of the artist. But when you start moving away from the guardrails and say, shock factor, it becomes an immoral tool in the hands of a worldview, of somebody with a worldview that's very absent, I think. It's get back to an art form. Can I get away with that in literature, music, dance? Totally. What I'm saying is you guys couldn't sit up there with guitars and not know how to make music and play for us, and we'd appreciate it and applaud and get going. Well, guess what they're doing with the modern movements? The emperor has no clothes, and they're falling for it, and it's just moving. And so what I would say is do this. Help support these kind of things, and don't be afraid of traditional paintings. Don't be afraid of being old-fashioned and loving what you like for those reasons. And LeConte Stewart was a perfect example. LeConte Stewart, Maynard Dixon, they knew each other. Look at those works. They're becoming, like you said, they're becoming pushed out. Like this is a fad that left. You know, if it's good and it's classical, it's always worth keeping.
And before we get to our last question, I'll just double down on that by saying this show is here until what, June, the end of June, the middle of June? Till June 18th. So come back and see it. Bring your friends back to see it. Bring your neighbors back to see it. Bring your families back to see it. invest in purchasing art of your own. If it's beautiful, if it's beautiful, and it really is, you can help make that difference. So anyway, that's my little unpaid solicitation. Come back. Last question.
I won't take any time because you pretty much just answered what I was going to ask, but I do have just a comment. As an artist myself and knowing a lot of artists, I think one of the goals that we have is to get people to forget that they're looking at paint. And I just want to congratulate you on your mastery for causing me and others to forget we're looking at paint on a canvas, and you take us to a place. You take us to the feeling of a place, and you're masterful at that. And I just want to thank you for what you do.
Thanks a lot.
And that's sort of a perfect way to end. And while Alana is coming back up to give you further instructions, which I believe include pie, why don't you give a nice round of applause for the staff here, for the family.
Thank you all so much for sharing your time and just an abundance of thoughtfulness with us this evening. I apologize to those of you online. I know there were some questions we didn't have time for. I will bother these people and try to get answers. The nice thing about it being online is we can answer in the comments after the fact. But we just had such a robust crowd here tonight and not enough time, and we've got to get to pie. So on behalf of the Brigham City Museum of Art and History and the entire Brigham City team, I want to thank our speakers again and thank all of you for coming tonight. Help yourself to a slice of delicious pie courtesy of our friends at Maddox Ranch House. And thank you, Jodi, for the plug for the catalog. Do what the woman says. Go downstairs. We're selling these, and the profits do benefit future museum programming. So if you weren't able to catch the exhibit beforehand, please make your way down. There's a stairway behind you. There's also an elevator available as well. And thank you for joining us this beautiful evening. Enjoy the rest of your night.
And there's something else we gotta say. Francis Schaefer, is that what it is? Oh, William Francis Schaefer. Sorry. You guys have been, all of you, right around the library going crazy. Francis Schaefer, on art and culture of the